Hello and welcome to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. We're your hosts. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Sean.
And we're glad you're here. For the next 15 minutes, we'll talk about a sales issue, big and small, for salespeople, sales leaders, and selling situations. We're glad you're here, and let's get started. Very special guest today, but I don't want to give his name away yet because I want you to lean in. Sean and I have invited someone on today that is really going to help us hammer home what we talk about a lot, and that's really how does sales and marketing work together effectively. Chris Spanier, we're glad to have you here today. We got 15 minutes where we're going to bring our audience some truth bombs about your insight into marketing and how to drive B2B sales, the cycle, and build synergy around sales and marketing. Chris, welcome.
Kevin, thank you. Sean, thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys together. I've been looking forward to this all week. You know, it's funny because, Kevin, exactly as you spoke to this, I've been in places, corporate as well as in my own practice, where, you know, sales and marketing, they don't always play well together. And, you know, it's always a missed opportunity from my perspective, because the reality of it is you know, we marketers, we tend to preach to the masses. We're out there doing email broadcasts, running ads, trying to figure out campaigns that are going to make awareness and get people excited. But it's the salespeople then that really bring it home. And when we're working at odds against each other, when we kind of see each other potentially as maybe not the enemy, but not necessarily the friend, so often we leave so much on the table. There's that disconnect. I remember go back 10 years ago, and we had a new head of sales, national sales coming in. Good guy, worked with him for years, but this is the first time he had ever led a large organization. And we went and visited with him. And the question was really, how can we help? And his name was John. John was, like I said, a smart guy, but I think maybe he was just a little overwhelmed that he wasn't thinking about marketing as an ally yet. He was still thinking about what I got to do, how do I drive my salespeople, how do I make my numbers, because now I'm the guy in the hot seat. And it was interesting because, you know, as we were talking, he's like, well, I appreciate all the help you can offer, which was a nice like intro comment. We were sincere. We were like, how do we make this better? How do we help you succeed? And over the course of the half hour, 45 minutes, that first conversation, you know, it was interesting watching the body language as we were talking, because everybody starts leaning in and we were throwing out ideas. And John would tell us, quite frankly, I don't like that, or that's not really going to work. And we were fine with that, because then what we started to do was to lay that foundation where, you know, John's like, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. And the more open he was with us, the more we could be creative and kind of lean into our skill set, and then come back to him and say, well, what do you think? And ultimately the decision was his. But he started to view us as, rather than just colleagues or coworkers, suddenly we were allies. And it really was pretty telling over the course of the 3 years I think we worked together. John was really successful. And it wasn't because of us marketers. We contributed to it, but we took a lot of pride in it. And I think I look back at that time, and that was just such a strong testimony for what happens when you have sales and marketing coming alongside together and working together. And marketers were always searching for a way to, how do we prove that this works? Is this resonate? You know, what metrics can we go against? And frankly, one of the best opportunities is when you talk to your sales team and say, how'd it go? You know, bring us along on the meeting, or come back and debrief us. And then we're going to get better and iterate. And ultimately, we're going to help each other be successful. I'm right with you. Sorry for the long, rambling answer there, but you've hit a vein. It is just so powerful when you get folks working together. It's just great.
Thank you for that. It's great having you on, Chris. I really do appreciate it. It's interesting. I think that a lot of sales managers, VPs of sales that might be listening to this, even CEOs of small companies that have both departments in their company, they may be saying that marketing's customer is sales, and that's not the right philosophy, in my opinion. The right philosophy is marketing and sales are partners. One is not the customer of the other. They're partners in this journey of customer acquisition and customer and revenue growth and customer growth. It's not I do something and I hand it off to you and you have to finish it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Sean. And I appreciate you making that point, because in that perspective, sometimes, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but customers, sometimes the customer's always right. We feel entitled. You know, what I say goes. And when you look at something, you instead say, no, it's actually us working together, coming together. That's when you start to say, well, now we're colleagues, and we're ultimately out to help the company to win. And if that means serving the client, meeting their needs, helping them to win, then it's a question of, well, together, how do we get to that place? But you're absolutely right. Marketers need to look at sales not as the enemy, but as one of the channels that we use to try to reach the customer, to serve the customer. And by that mindset, we need to have sort of that servant approach of how do we serve? How do we help? But at the same time, when the salespeople come back and they just dictate, oh, you're an idiot, I'm not getting leads because marketing fails, or then all that's doing is putting a divide between us. Instead, I've always found it's better when we look at this and say, what worked, what didn't work, give us insights, help us get smarter, and then we get smarter together, and then ultimately the company wins and everybody does better. An interesting aside, well, about a month ago, I had a chance to sit down with the CEO of a fairly successful nonprofit here in the region, and super bright lady. And one of the many insights she shared with me was the fact that she actually tied her sales leaders' compensation with her head of marketing's compensation. It wasn't an us or them. It was very much, if they succeed, you succeed. And I hadn't run across that very often, but you're motivating the right behaviors. You're looking this in a holistic way. And I think that's one of the reasons they've been as successful as they have been.
Fantastic. Chris, it occurs to me that there's probably some folks out there. We have a listener audience that spans the US and even a little bit further outside, but some of these people are in manufacturing and they have an internal marketing department. They're in SaaS and they have an external marketing department. Can you talk about and kind of really dig in, get a handhold on how storytelling has a major role in how we go to market, whether you have an internal or external? Because I think some people might be looking for, hey, what does good look like day in, day out?
That's a really good question. I think it's a little trite maybe in this day and age, but it is still so true that we as human beings are wired for storytelling. Think about every amount of time we've spent at movies or hanging out around a bonfire, trading stories with friends, or just hanging out, reading social media. It's all different versions of a story. And I think we are, generally speaking, we are social creatures. And so we are always looking for that connection to somebody else. Part of what we've got to do as marketers, we tend to do a little bit more, I think, projecting out. So we try to anticipate, whereas I think good salespeople are great listeners and they're taking in. But then that's where we can adjust the story and try to really understand how we can really help the customer win. They're the hero. We're simply the guide. We're simply the aid. Very much Donald Miller story brain kind of thinking. But then, to your point, any marketer, when it gets down right to it, where I think going back to the Bible of story brand, one of the things that I think a lot of marketers sometimes get tripped up on, and I've certainly done it in my career, so we get so caught up on how cool our product or our service is that that's all we want to do is talk about that. And we go on about all the specifications and all the really great work that went into it. And there's a sense of pride about what it is that we deliver, what we've accomplished. And that should be acknowledged and appreciated. But oftentimes that's not part of the marketing. That's not part of the sales conversation. That props us up internally, that helps us have confidence to go to market. But what we always need to remain focused on as we're telling our story is, how do we tell this story in a compelling way that when the prospective client or the current customer hears that, they see themselves reflected in it. They think about it and they're like, they get me. Or, oh, this potentially solves something that I don't quite know yet how to do, or I didn't know it was possible. And that's when the neurons start firing and people are like, oh, and suddenly we go from somebody selling something to somebody who's solving something. If you're familiar with DISC, we're scooting our chair around to the side of the table as a high I or a high S. We're all about that connection and helping and serving others. Not that people that aren't B's and C's don't do a great job at this, but it's very much you are the hero. You're the person that we're trying to help ultimately be successful. So I think regardless of whether you're the manufacturer, the SaaS company, or whatever it is that you're selling or marketing, your message has to be written from the customer's perspective about how you're going to help them defeat whatever is their big evil, the big challenge that they're up against. And it's all about them.
It's interesting you say that. There's an old adage that I know that both of you have heard. I've used it before on this podcast, and that is, you don't sell the drill, you sell the hole. And actually, what the customer cares about is not so much that there's a hole in that 2x4 or whatever that hole is made in, but it's whatever you're going to put through that hole or into that hole or attached to that hole. That's the value to the customer. They don't care about the hole. They care about what they're putting through it. And they definitely don't care about the drill, but the transaction gets paid because the drill gets sold. And so many of our young salespeople and maybe our young marketing people, they talk about the RPMs, the speed of the drill. They talk about the type of the keyless chuck that it has. They talk about how long the battery life is. All important things on the fringes, but it's not that important compared to why in the world are we drilling a hole into that 2x4. It goes right back into that sales messaging, sales story, finding out that information.
No, you're absolutely right. Sean, you and I were actually earlier last week, I think, trading kind of notes on a friend of ours who made a great post. And I threw out the example, and it's an old one, but it's still so true for any of us of a certain age. When Apple computers, they were introducing a product called the Apple Lisa. And I've seen this. They ran a 9-page ad, full color, I think, in the New York Times. And it was basically a user manual. Here's how to use this. And I understand, I appreciate what they were trying to do because they were introducing something so different and so revolutionary that we've got to help people connect this. But they underestimated the intelligence of their audience. They were too focused on just how cool the product was. And arguably it was cool, but no surprise, it flopped. It was too much about what they had accomplished, what they had done. And there was nothing about how this was going to help them increase their business, how it was going to help them save time and spend more quality time with their family, or whatever it was the person they wanted to purchase that computer was going to get out of this. It was all about Apple. It was not about them. And then 10 years later, they come back and completely reinvent themselves, and they have the 2-word Think Different campaign that completely changed how people marketed Apple products and how, frankly, a lot of us are, because it was such a great illustration.
And as we record this, they just recently had the 40th anniversary of the introduction of the Mac. And the introduction of the Mac, if you remember that ad, and I distinctly remember it, most people have watched the review, even if you're too young to remember when it was actually being introduced, you're not 40 years old. It was not about the computer at all. It was about what does it do? And it was about, it gave you freedom from the tyranny of the 1984 kind of capability that was out there. And it was such a powerful ad that it revolutionized ad making from that point forward. But it was because now they had a marketer as the king of the company, as opposed to before that, they had a technology person as the king of the company. And that marketer knew how to market and knew how to make a splash and knew how to set the stage. And they sold out Macs in no time at all. They could not make a Mac fast enough after that ad.
It brings to mind another fairly well-known name, Simon Sinek. And he talks about find your why. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And that Apple ad, that Think Different, or the 1984 ad, was such a great illustration of that. I'm not going to try to quote it, but they talked about in the Think Different ad, the voiceovers they did, one of which was Steve Jobs, one version. But he talks about we are the ones, the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who actually do. And who of us watching that ad has never felt awkward or felt like, oh, the world against me, or what I'm trying to do, nobody understands, but I want to make a positive difference in the world. Suddenly, here's this relatively small computer company that came along and said, we get you. And there wasn't a single picture of a single computer in any of their ads. But what they did is they posted these beautiful images of Neil Armstrong or Amelia Earhart or Albert Einstein, or pick your person. And it's like, would you like to be like this person? We're here because we believe in them and we believe in you. And it almost gives you goosebumps because you're like, wow, they get, and again, they make a good profit as a part of that. But if you can tap into that kind of mindset and help your clients get there, man, there's just no holding it back.
This has been great, Chris, but I have more questions for you. Can you come back next week and be on our podcast again? Because we haven't really talked about what you do and why you do it. We'd like to give you time to do that as well.
I appreciate that. No, love the conversation. Absolutely love to come back.
Cool. So, hey, everybody out there in listener land, we're going to wrap this up. We're right at 15 minutes right now, according to the clock on my computer. And I would like to invite you to come back next week to listen to more about Chris Spanier. And he can tell us about his company as well, how to get a hold of Chris, and also some more marketing leadership that will help salespeople make their number and make small companies be more successful. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for joining us on this podcast of Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. We hope that we were able to share some valuable insight, valuable knowledge with you to make your selling adventures easier and more successful. Please join us every week. We drop these on Tuesday afternoon at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Please subscribe to us in your favorite podcast player. Also, please join us on LinkedIn, where we do a CEO workshop, and that CEO workshop is dedicated monthly to big questions that CEOs are having and how to grow their business and drive sales. You can find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. Thank you very much. Have a great day.